I think so many people talk about that cyber is noisy, but I actually want to go a little less generic and more specific now and work that problem, because everyone's always talking about capacity. I don't have time. I have tool fatigue, blah, 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 blah. But I want to get into, because I know you've worked this, I want to get into how do we actually remove the noise in cyber, aka we work the problem rather than just say cyber's noisy and we're not coping and we're all distressed. So I know you've really given this some thought. So share with me your initial thoughts of, let's not just talk about this being noisy, but how do we remove, what have you learned about removing the noise in cyber and really driving your priority?
Just a really quick comment out there on the noise. Like, you turn on a vulnerability management tool, you turn on a DLP tool, or you turn on a WAF. The first thing you're going to see is millions, if not billions, of alerts. And the real question is, so what? Like, what should we be working on? I'll step into vulnerability management, right? You can do the whole prioritization. Let's take all of those vulnerabilities, prioritize them: informational, low, medium, high, critical. That's kind of been out there for, I guess, decades, right? And then you look at something like the CISA Kev that's come out. What's known and exploited in the wild right now? That's another beautiful lens of view to put on the data, right? So you can say, show me what's critical, high, and medium that's actually being exploited in the wild. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, it's not about what's vulnerable, it's about what's being targeted, but actually, more importantly, what are those toxic combinations? Lots of buzzwords, but the important thing is, what does that attack path through your environment look like? Something that pen testing is great at highlighting, but most companies can't afford to do 24/7 pen testing. Well, I mean, it highlights one path through your environment, right? Typically the pen test, but there'll be thousands of undiscovered ones. So I guess that's the weird challenge between the pen test will show you a couple of ways to compromise your environment, and the VM tool will show you millions of possible ways to compromise your environment. And I think there's something in between there where you're going to get the optimal value out of.
That is so interesting. So hold on, you've just said something, and this is awesome, because we've gone straight into the real issue here, which is, how do we repurpose all of these feeds to target how we are being targeted? And I'm going to ask you another sort of fundamental question at the top, which is, okay, so we've been doing this for 20 years.
Ultimately, we should manage risk, and that risk quantification is that other tricky part of the equation. Somewhere between the million vulnerabilities and the 3 pen test findings, there's actual real risk that lives in there for the business. And you can't spend your whole day in VM, and you can't spend 3 weeks of a year on a pen test and call it done. Like, neither of those two is sufficient to move the needle, I don't think.
It's not, is it? So you also mentioned a moment ago when you execute a pen test, and this is a huge frustration of mine, that the scope is very much around a couple of, let's be honest, obvious scopes and paths. And you and I both know what gets you hacked is not, oddly, actually now almost exclusively not what that scope is. Example, people focus on the Crown Jewel application. It's been looked at so much, especially third-party ones as well. But the side component to it, the cloud environment, whatever it might, the context in which it sits is the vulnerable component here. So why is it that we focus on such obvious things? And how on earth do we break this thinking? And how do we break the thinking of the high, medium, and lows as well? Because they're not getting us to the true attack path, what will get us hacked.
I think something we've done recently, there was a big retailer in the UK, is Marks & Spencer, that got compromised. There's a lot of information out there, but what we try to do is kind of find the attack path or the possible things that could have gone wrong there. So these are the steps the attackers took, right? And then we map that against what controls do we have in that space and which controls could detect or prevent this from happening. So we're going back and having a look at, our controls like our VPN. Is there any way, shape, or form you can get onto our VPN with just a single factor method of authentication? Really looking back at that. But then also, what's the thing? Attackers aren't hacking systems these days. They're just logging in, right? Because everything's cloud accessible, all just based on your single sign-on. If I can get you to click on a dodgy link or Heaven's alive at your service desk, just reset your credentials and your MFA.
Where's the scan for that?
Terrifying. Yeah, there is no scan for that, right?
Right.
And those are harder problems to solve because it's process change, people change. Calling a service desk, people want to help each other, right? Like, that's the foundation of connectivity and things like that. And especially if someone's calling in disgruntled or you're a crying baby in the background, there's lots of ways to do that social engineering where you amp up the pressure to make skip the process if indeed there is a process, right? But that's what we really need to dive into. And how do we secure that process? And not with a policy document or a process document, but we should be testing that as well. We should be calling our own service desk and seeing if we can reset our own credentials or someone else's credentials in our company without providing the right information.
It's fascinating you mentioned this. So this is great. Let's go back now to a root cause and get some hard questions answered. So we said, how do we remove the noise? And then we said, the trouble is we're almost, what's the word? Our noise is contingent, or our compliance is contingent on the noise. So there's a dependency now we need to somehow decouple. No compliance that I have ever seen has asked us to model the attack path that will result in the breach either. So now we've got two competing problems. And then we go back to the top level, which is, now we're back in a capacity issue again. So how do we work that problem, Jerome? We know what, or some of us, or many of us know what to do, but we're not doing it.
Yeah, I think the reason the compliance is also typically catching you out or catching us out is because we put these things into policy. We Google best practice, or we download a CIS template or in this template, and we take those best practices and just dump those into our policy. So when the auditors come around, we're found lacking against the policy that we've kind of signed ourselves up for. So we've set the hurdle impossibly high for ourselves and then run straight into it, which is just not a great way of doing things. I think it needs to be balanced. Audit findings come out, they always want a date attached. Sorry, just harping on audit, I guess, a little briefly. Even the low findings, the findings that we know are there and they're probably lying, if we can probably fix them, why do we need to attach a date target to a low finding when we have a high audit finding? It's this thing of everyone wants to consume all of your time, and I think it's about really guarding that, but managing those expectations. And it doesn't help when we set ourselves up to fail with our SLA on criticals is 1 day, 1 week, 1 hour, or whatever it is, right?
That is very, very important. Set the bar where the true risk is.
Yeah.
So please help me work this. We have so many experienced people out there, yet they're all pulled into the opposite of that statement. And I see it all the time. The number of programs working to rationalize very large vulnerability management programs from tens of thousands down to, digits of 10 or 20 real emergencies, as we call them. That's another interesting one. We decided to create our own category. We've got some criticals and got some really criticals. Well, what are really criticals? They're emergencies, right? They are a statistical likelihood. So why is it when we know all this stuff, we still don't do it? And then we buy more tooling. Jerome, there's a psyche in here, isn't there? There's something going on. And you say this and it's obvious. You go to the doctor and they say, well, you need to lose some weight and you need to have your exercise, stop smoking, stop drinking, or reduce your drinking at least. We know all this stuff, but we're not doing it. Is this an inherent human CISO condition here, or?
If we step into the threat modeling, right, there's this awesome example I heard once on a podcast. You step out, you got a child with you, let's say a 5-year-old or something like that. You step out the front door of your house. The sun is beating down on you. There's a car driving past the front street, and then there's a dog being walked along the path. Which of those three is a risk? The answer is probably all of them. If you don't have sunscreen on, the sun eventually becomes a risk. If you don't have a hat, there's lots of ways you can mitigate that risk. The car is driving in the road, so it's probably not a risk for you. Maybe that dog's leash is looser. Maybe the dog's barking at you. It's all about that context of where is the risk. I think the human brain is so programmed to want to have the full picture. We want to understand what is the likelihood of that dog attacking us, what is the probability, or what is the impact going to be of that. But the honest truth is that if you ask someone, what are you most concerned about in your environment? That gut feel is probably the first thing that you should be working on.
Oh, that is so astute to say that. Gut feel. I'm using that phrase all the time now, because when you can... Okay, so let's take to your top level observation first. We're programmed to see the full picture.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so we take our inputs and cast the net wide. And if you look at your statement earlier on, the vulnerability path or the attack path is not in that cast wide net. It's in a very specific hole in the net.
Yeah, absolutely right.
There's a root cause.
And it's that comment of the path. Each element along the path may all be mediums, right? Stringing a bunch of medium vulnerabilities together lets you exploit an environment. It's that comment of, each vulnerability in and of itself isn't quite there yet.
It's the human brain, though, bias in that it will deal with the emergency first and not see the true emergency. So example. I've written down on my pad here, you've described, the first part is X equals Y, right? Which is the problem equals this critical bug. That's the red alert. But the true problem is A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus N to the what? And there's your equation, and that's the attack path. That is not glowing red.
Yeah, exactly right. That's not being lifted up. And
when we've got so many other opportunities in that linear equation, and it is pretty linear. Just because a user is breached doesn't mean it's game over.
Yeah.
By any means. But is that problem too amorphous and too hard to do? And we go and say, that's okay, we've got a SOC, so we'll be all right. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I think it's that, I don't want to say defeatist, because I know CISOs and security leaders and security teams are working really hard at solving the problems, catching the malicious activity and things like that. But I think there's definitely a bit of acceptance in there is too much for us to address. We're going to go decide what makes the most sense. But I feel like people aren't having that intentional decision. They're not deciding what's important to fix. They're just always responding to the urgent. So if you look at cyber news, people are always like, hey, what's the latest 0 day? And people are getting pulled in all these different directions. Do we have this in our environment? What's our SBOM say? What does our vuln management system say? People are always responding to all of these urgent voices calling for your attention that they're not focused on what is the most important thing I need to do. If you have an active attack happening, please definitely go respond to that.